People have arrived now, so we'll get started. My name is Will Struck and I'm an Assistant Secretary at the Victorian Trades Hall Council. Welcome to the 2021 HSR Conference, which is being sponsored by Slater & Gordon. A reminder that there are captions for this conference, so if you need captions, please go back to the timeline and select the link that says with captions. So I'd like to begin by welcoming Ngawi Dr. Carolyn Briggs AM, who's going to do the Welcome to Country for this conference. Carolyn is a Bunwurrung senior elder and the chairperson and founder of the Bunwurrung Foundation. She's been involved in developing and supporting opportunities for Indigenous youth and Bunwurrung culture for over 40 years. Please welcome Dr. Carolyn Briggs.
So good morning. Womanjika. Womanjika, Marin Big Big Bunwurrung, Nermda Barupton Arthur Willem. Come with a purpose to our beautiful home, the lands of the two great bays. My name is Carolyn Briggs and I am the descendant of the Yallikat Willem of the Bunwurrung language group of the Kulin Nation. It is my great pleasure to be able to welcome you all here today. But it is my responsibility to ensure that you do come with a purpose. Womanjika, come, Asta come, and what is your intention? I do so not only on behalf of my ancestors, the Bunwurrung, I do so on behalf of all First Nations people on which lands we meet today. First Nations peoples across Australia all share a special connection to the lands and waters of their ancestors that has not been disconnected since millennia, despite the dispossession, the displacement, the discrimination that we've all experienced over the last 230 years. This connection dates back to our creation stories. For the Bunwurrung, our creation stories tells us of Bunjil, our creator spirit, who travels as an eagle, and how he created these lands and waters around where we meet today. He also created the Kulin people and taught them about the circular relationships they have with these lands and waters in order for us to be taken care of by the land. We also have to take care of the land. And we did this through adhering to the Wurrungi Bek, the law of the land, our customary laws, much like our laws today. These laws dictated how we interacted with each other and how we interacted with our lands and how we conduct ourselves whilst we're on someone else's country. The Bunwurrung Wurrungi Bek speaks of three Pacific laws. The first law is Yelenge, knowledge. It is a responsibility that we all have knowledge. And once that knowledge has been attained, we have the responsibility to ensure its survival, its continuation. We have the responsibility for our younger generations to maintain that knowledge and pass it down, so it can be used for our future generations. We also have the law of Jambana. This law speaks of community, the importance of community, the importance of a diverse community, but a unified community. The Bunwurrung people of the Kulin Nation understood this power of diversity that is within our lands, that increases our capabilities. It was always good to share our stories and our different experiences. However, they understood how to utilize this very powerful tool. They had to identify a common purpose. And what are those things that we do have in common? Finally, the last law is Pavanata, or connection to country, or we might call it honouring sacred ground, paying respects to our past generations. the people who took care of the land before us, the people who have lived and died on the lands before we were here, paying respects to those stories and history on a land which we live today. And it is important to pay respects to that history. And we are very fortunate in this continent we now know as Australia to have an 80,000 years of human history. And it is most important to pay that respect, not only while we're here or at work or when we go home. And if we can adhere to these three Wurrungi Biks, I can say once again in the language of my ancestors, Wamanjika, Maranbik Bik Bunurong, Namda Baruptan Artha Willam. Come with a purpose to our beautiful home, and I wish you well on your endeavours. So Nungujin, you are in my present and I am in yours. So have a beautiful day. Thank you.
So with thanks to Carolyn, wherever you are watching from today, we acknowledge that the lands were stolen, never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Before we kick off into the housekeeping, I'd also like to do the Victorian Trades Hall Council Statement of Solidarity. This is an expression of the values that we bring to everything that we do as trade unionists. We are union. We stand united as part of a great movement of workers. Our diversity is our strength. Our solidarity is our power. We respect and take care of each other. Prejudice and discrimination, including misogyny, racism, homophobia, and all other hatreds, have no place in our movement. We rise together. Today and every day, we commit ourselves to achieving justice, fairness, equality, and dignity for all workers. Solidarity forever. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and then I'm going to introduce some of our speakers. So every video platform is a little bit different, so I'm just going to talk you through some of the key features on the screen that you have today. First off, starting on the top right-hand side of your screen, you can see how many more minutes there are before this session is scheduled to finish. So moving down, you'll see a box that says Session Information. So if you click on the arrow, it's going to expand that box and it's going to tell you everything you need to know about the session you're watching. Moving down, you'll see a box that says Live Q&A. So this is where you can submit any questions that you have, and we're going to be asking for your questions along the way throughout the conference. So familiarise yourself with that particular box. It's called Live Q&A. And then lastly, you'll see a box that says My Session Notes. And that's where, if you want to, you can keep any personal notes that you have from this particular session. On the top left-hand side of your screen, you're going to see a box that says back. You can see something that says Back to Timeline. And that's going to bring you back to, if you click on that, it takes you back to an overview of today's program. And just a reminder that if you want to receive the certificate of attendance for today, you'll need to attend all 3 sessions of the day. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Now, our first speaker is Luke Hilakari. Luke is the Secretary of the Victorian Trades Hall Council. Now, you may have seen him at a rally somewhere or talking to the media about issues of importance to workers, particularly around occupational health and safety. So he is here today to welcome you all to today's conference. Come on up, Luke.
Hello, everybody. Can I first thank Will for a great introduction, as always, and also Dr. Briggs for a proper, thorough and terrific welcome to country. Can I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Bunurong people, and pay my respects to elders like Carolyn Briggs, those present and those who are coming along. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for today. I'd like to thank Slater & Gordon and Australian Super for helping make this happen, but also, most importantly, also to WorkSafe, led ably by Colin Radford. It is super important that they support and fund this day. It's really important for the whole OH&S calendar for the year. And lastly, I also want to thank the team at Trades Hall who have done just such a terrific job of putting together those packs that you have with you today, making sure that today runs pretty smoothly. Now, welcome HSRs. It is unusual that we're back here again, right? That we're not meeting each other face to face at the convention centre, that we in 2021 are still doing this online. But I'm glad that 1,200 of us have joined us from across the state. It is amazing that we have so many people here right now who care so deeply about health and safety. It is one of the biggest conferences we've had to date. Sadly, I have to report that this year, 46 workers have died at work, and we've had 18,916 people that have been injured. We think no worker should be killed on the job, and it's our job collectively to keep employers accountable so they have the safety in place to make sure that that doesn't happen, but also to the 18,000 people who in this calendar year who've been injured on the job. Like, that is terrible for them, for their families, and will have a lasting impact. What I do know, though, is that those numbers would be far greater if it wasn't for the work that you do as a group of HSRs. So congratulations for the most important work that you do to keep Victorians safe. Now, this year's conference, it's a bit of a different theme. We are talking HSR's Super Sleuths, exercising your powers to uncover the hidden hazards and risks. Now, I always knew that you as HSRs were a little bit like detectives in the workplace. We often piece together clues and we investigate how we can make our workplace safer. As HSRs, you encounter all different types of hazards and risks in your workplace, but not all of them are physical. Not all of them are visible. Some hazards are hidden, and employers refuse to acknowledge their existence or say that maybe these exposures are really just the risk of doing the job, right? But we know as HSRs and organisers that just because you can't see it or it's hard to see, it doesn't mean it's not there. So these hazards are hidden, and it often means that these injuries occur over a longer period of time, and they can cause severe illnesses. The consequences of these exposures are often life-changing to the workers affected and their friends and family, as well as their workmates. Our keynote speaker today, Lynn Fishke, will spend a lot of time talking about this, so I'm really excited to bring Professor Lynn up. We're going to talk today also about what you should look out for to spot these hazards and how we get them addressed. And if you're thinking about hidden hazards, there's probably been no bigger hidden hazard that's hit this planet than COVID-19. It has fundamentally changed the way we've worked, from us having to wear masks in and around the workplace to us having to do that in our everyday lives. And just because the Victoria is now somewhat heading out of lockdown doesn't mean that COVID-19 is gone, and doesn't mean it's not a risk at work. If you remember with the first wave of COVID-19, 80% of those infections were passed on in the workplace. And as we open up and more people head back to work, it's going to be a greater risk and people will get affected. So we need to work out how we make sure we keep people safe. Our collective thinks, safety is core union business. Safety is wearing high vis in a rail corridor. Safety might be wearing a hard hat in a construction site. Safety would be wearing a hairnet if you're in a food manufacturing site. Safety is also wearing a mask these days to stop the prevention of disease. Almost 5 million Victorians right now have rolled up the sleeve to get the jab. That is safety too. That is protecting your workmates, your friends and your family, and it's the most important thing we can do to make sure that we keep ourselves safe. Now, you as HSRs will be entering a pretty difficult place. When people are returning to work, and later into probably next year, when unvaccinated people head back to work, there will be active debates on your sites about what is safe to work. Is it safe to work with unvaccinated people? Like, there will be a big conversation. It'll be a hard conversation for you to have. So we need to start talking about that collectively, about how we make sure that when we work together, that we do so in a safe way. Now, the interesting thing also about COVID-19 is when we look at injuries. So up to date, up to 30th September 2021, 700 workers have had approved work cover claim as a result of being infected by COVID-19 at work. Workmates are going to talk to you about this. Over 600 more workers have had approved claim as a result of a psychological impact of COVID-19. So that's more conversations that we need to start thinking about. Work cover claims linked to COVID-19 will continue to increase each month. So you need to be aware about that too. But COVID-19 doesn't exist in some vacuum out there. It impacts everyone, and that's why our response needs to be collective. I want to pay tribute to all those workers who have been on the front line. I'm thinking of our health workers, to our supermarket workers, to our emergency service workers, to the transport and warehousing industries, to cleaners, and many, many others. They have been carrying the burden and keeping this country going for all the rest of us. And they've had just such an important role over the last 2 years in this pandemic to make sure that we lived some sense of our normal lives. The best thing we can do to protect those workers right now, and especially I'm thinking about our health workers who are really at the pointy end of this in hospitals treating COVID-19 patients, is to make sure that we talk to our friends, our families and our co-workers about getting a jab. That is what real solidarity looks like. Now, leaving COVID-19 aside for a bit, we should talk about some changes that have happened. We've got some new laws. And while COVID-19 has taken up a fair bit of our energy, it doesn't mean we've stopped doing the things to make sure that our work sites are also safer in a legislative sense that will give you more powers. For years, HSRs and unions have sought the ability to record what's happening on site, and that hasn't been in the law. So the OH&S Act was improved this year, so you now have the right to collect evidence on site, like a detective or like a HSR sleuth, whatever we're calling it. So you'll be able to now take photos of a hazard. You'll be able to take sketches and make measurements. You'll be able to take audio recordings. You'll be able to take video recordings. Now, some of you will be saying, oh, well, I've always done that. But for some of you HSR reps, you haven't been able to do that, and it has resulted in some HSR reps who have gone out there and they've taken video or camera footage or taken a picture or written something down like a sketch or something like that. They've actually lost their jobs over this. So this was a really important change. So it's a new power that we have, and we're very happy that that's in place. And it's really sensible, right? If you see something that's wrong on site, the best way really these days to do it is go out, take your camera out or your phone out and put the camera setting on and just take a picture of it so you've got the evidence. And then you can talk to about the employer and WorkSafe and others about it in a really fulsome way. So we're really excited that that's been changed. The other major change reflects the changing nature of our workplaces. You've seen in many places across Victoria the rise of labour hire. Labour hire is a way that employers have used to avoid their obligations of employing staff directly. But it's meant previously that because the labour hire company doesn't control the site, really these group of workers haven't been under the same sort of OH&S laws that have affected that the workers who permanently work on site that aren't part of that labour hire company have benefit from. Well, that's changed. There will be no longer a two-tier system of safety in our workplaces. Labour hire firms will have a duty as well as the employer to make sure that the host employer's duties apply to everybody. So everyone's can be safe on the one site, and I'm really excited about that. It was beyond time that labour hire got included in such a way. So they're two major changes that will affect thousands of workers. For labour hire workers in Victoria, for example, there's over 600,000 of them. So this is a big deal. Comrades, in wrapping up, I just want to say congratulations for being here today. 1,200 of you who do some of the most important jobs, I think, in the state of Victoria, which is making sure that people come home safely. I'm really excited about the speakers we've got today. I think they're going to be fantastic. Again, for those of you who have been HSRs and working on front lines, we all collectively take your hats off to you. You've done a massive job. I'm looking forward to next year where we can actually do this face to face. It'll be exciting to see you all back in a big conference hall. But congratulations for being today, and I'll pass you back to Will.
All right, thank you to Luke. So I'd now like to welcome Minister Ingrid Stitt. Minister Stitt is the Victorian Minister for Workplace Safety. She's a great friend to all of us. She's been passionate about occupational health and safety for a very long time because before entering Parliament, she was the Secretary of the Australian Services Union Private Sector Branch. Unfortunately, this is a sitting day, so she can't join us in person, but she has recorded a live message for the conference.
Good morning. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge any First Nations people with us today. I'd also like to acknowledge Luke and the team at HSR Council for inviting me to join you virtually today. I'd like to begin by thanking Victoria's workplace health and safety representatives. Yours is a challenging, rewarding and vitally important job. You're among the first responders in our workplace safety system, and you understand how important workplace safety is to ensuring we all come home safe each day. The work you perform is one of the reasons I'm so proud to be the Minister for Workplace Safety. While Victoria remains one of the safest places to work in the world, and you've all played a huge role in this, we can never take this for granted or relax our strong focus on safety. For all of us, the nature of work has changed dramatically over the past 18 months. Face masks, remote working, QR codes, social distancing, new technology and flexible work are now part of the fabric of thousands of Victorian workplaces. As a result, you've had to change the way you work too. A large part of your focus now is ensuring Victorians understand exactly what they need to do to comply with government health directions to protect themselves, their workmates, their families, and the wider community. In every instance, you've risen to the challenge, and I thank you and commend you. The Andrews Labor government continues to deliver important reforms to ensure that every workplace in Victoria is as safe as it possibly can be and to support injured workers and their families to get the support they need. Reforms include the new workplace manslaughter laws, a provisional payment scheme to support workers who experience a mental injury, establishing the Ministerial Task Force on Workplace Sexual Harassment, the Silica Action Plan, OHS protections for labour hire workers, and changes to give the Accident Compensation Conciliation Service new arbitration powers to resolve workers' compensation disputes. The theme of your conference, HSR Super Sleuths, is very apt given we've recently passed laws giving you new powers to take photographs, make measurement sketches and recordings of OHS concerns in your workplace. I think being able to record potential breaches will make a real difference in being able to uncover hazards and risks at work. Additionally, we have committed to developing Australia's first psychological health regulations. These regulations will strengthen the OHS framework by providing clearer guidance to employers on their obligations to protect workers from mental injury. This will also have positive implications for how you as health and safety reps can have a positive role in the mental wellbeing of your co-workers. I also want to touch on the task force I've set up to look at how we can better prevent and respond to instances of sexual harassment in the workplace. This involves looking at the tools, resources and training that our HSRs will need so that you can be confident in assessing risks and supporting colleagues if an incident does occur. Without a doubt, the isolation and uncertainty of the pandemic has severely impacted the mental health of thousands of Victorian workers. Prior to 2020, the number of mental health injuries in Victorian workplaces was already on the rise. As workplace health and safety reps, this can make your job very challenging at times. And as you know, a safe work environment must include considerations of workers' mental health. Workplace mental injuries comprise 13% of all new claims in Victoria and are projected to increase to at least 33% of all new claims by 2030. Behind these stats are real people. They're hardworking Victorians who go to work each day to provide for themselves and their families. They may suffer stress, anxiety or depression as a result of an unsafe workplace or a toxic workplace culture. It could also be the result of workplace violence and aggression in public-facing roles, which we're focusing on ending because violence towards workers is never okay. It's important to be aware of your own mental health. Together with your colleagues, I encourage you to reach out for help when you need it and to keep looking out for workmates who may be doing it tough. It's essential, of course, to look out for the traditional hazards that continue to cause injuries and deaths in Victorian workplaces. Every risk assessment, safety audit, training session or policy update you instigate is of the utmost importance. The health and safety of Victorian workers will always be a top priority for the Andrews Labor government. Every worker deserves a safe workplace, and I'm extremely grateful for the work that you do, taking action where it's needed and looking out for your workmates. By working together and sharing our knowledge and skills, we can make a difference, which is why conferences like this and the role you play is so important. I thank you for everything you do, and I wish you a very successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I'd now like to extend a welcome to Colin Radford, who is joining us live from WorkSafe HQ. Colin has been the CEO of WorkSafe Victoria since 2019. Now, Colin has agreed to answer some questions that you might have for him today. So if you do have any questions, just a reminder that you've got to pop them into the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll ask. We won't be able to ask everybody all of the questions that you'll have, but we'll ask some of those questions to Colin. So thank you, Colin.
Thank you, Will, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for that very warm welcome, and to yourself and Luke. It's always a great privilege to join Trades Hall and all of you for this important conference each year. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which we're all meeting today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any other First Nations people who are with us today. I'd also like to acknowledge the Minister for Workplace Safety, Ingrid Stitt, and echo her message of support and appreciation for the work that you do in workplaces across Victoria every day. I'd also echo the comments that Luke made at the opening about the incredible work, effort and commitment of those who have kept our economy, our health services, our daily lives running throughout the pandemic. Those frontline workers in retail, in health, in child protection, in our police force, every element of where we need support and assistance, people have stood up. And they've done that on behalf of the rest of us. And today, WorkSafe's annual report will be tabled in Parliament, and the front cover of our annual report features a number of those frontline workers with the simple words, thank you. And I just want to echo those comments that Luke made about the outstanding job that those workers have done for all of us. It's amazing how quickly a year rolls around. Before we know it, it's October. We're back together again for WorkSafe's Health and Safety Month and this critically important conference for Victoria's network of HSRs. This year's conference theme, a couple of people have reflected on this, HSR Super Sleuths, exercising your powers to uncover hidden hazards and risks. Now, I was thinking about this and my mind went to that great fictional detective, Sherlock Holmes, and how he drew on his astute powers of observation and deduction to crack the case. In many respects, that is also the role of HSRs, being the eyes and ears on the ground of your workplace, observing health and safety practices, identifying issues, and persisting in the search for a satisfactory resolution. Yours is such an important role in Victoria's OHS landscape, one that you have put your hands up for, to advocate for the health and safety of your colleagues, on top of your day job, and one for which WorkSafe, as the state's OHS regulator, is incredibly grateful. Now, being a super sleuth does not mean being a secret agent, behind the scenes, hiding in the shadows. At WorkSafe, we want to shout your names from the rooftops. We want all HSRs and the work you do to be highly visible. We want to ensure you are seen, heard, respected, engaged, and consulted. And we want you to be empowered to make the difference that we know your presence can and does make to the health and safety outcomes of those in your designated work groups. We want to make sure that you have the confidence, the support, the tools you need to be out from the shadows, up front and in plain sight. And yet we know that unfortunately, many workplaces fail to understand the basics when it comes to their obligations and HSRs. Now, I was once an HSR myself. I've also been a union delegate and a union official. And I know just how tough all three of those jobs can be. So I have nothing but the utmost respect and gratitude for all of you and the work that you do. There's no doubt being an HSR can be a challenge at the best of times, let alone in the midst of a global pandemic that has been with us now for the best part of 2 years. But aside from COVID, the challenges facing the HSRs of today are not too dissimilar to those from my time some 30 odd years ago, and WorkSafe understands them very well. Employers don't always understand your role or when, why, or how to engage. You don't always feel supported or respected in your workplace, or feeling that you're not fully equipped to understand and execute the powers you hold under Victoria's OHS legislation. But make no mistake, you are the trusted eyes and ears of your colleagues and employers on the ground in Victorian workplaces, from hospital wards to factory floors, building sites to long shifts at night, in office blocks or on the docks, and everything in between. Even if some of your workplaces and the way people are working look a bit different to how they once did, we need you more than ever, with so many challenges and so many changes in workplaces. Whether it's COVID-19, remote working, the continued growth in mental injuries, occupational violence and aggression, sexual harassment, bullying, and gendered violence. And far too many people are still being hurt or even killed in the same ways that they have been for centuries, falling from heights, being crushed or hit by moving objects, interacting with machinery, and work-related illness and disease. As HSRs, you are our partners in prevention, the essential link and the conduit of consultation between your employers and workers. Now, the theme of today's conference also got me thinking about how WorkSafe can better engage with and empower this strong network of HSRs so we can continue to face these challenges together. How can WorkSafe be the best Watson to your homes? We've got a wealth of information for HSRs on our website and our advisory service, and a dedicated team of HSR support officers are just a phone call away. But we have identified HSRs as being so important to our statewide efforts to reduce workplace harm that we've prioritised an even greater suite of supports that we will deliver over the next 3 years. Having more HSRs in more Victorian workplaces, raising your profile so you are visible, respected and valued, continuing our work to educate employers and improve attitudes towards HSRs so they are clear on your role and why, when and how to engage, providing access to training and development, a greater suite of information and easier access to website content, and making sure you have a really strong support network. This year, you've done it tough, but you've also done it incredibly well. Like the great Sherlock Holmes, your work every day leaves a legacy, a proud, high, and unrelenting standard for workplace safety. Your work will live on for the legendary work that you do as HSRs. So I would like to sincerely thank you for your dedication and commitment to making our workplaces safer. I'm confident that by working together, we'll crack the case. Some might even say it's elementary. Thank you and enjoy the conference. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you. Thanks, Will.
Excellent, Colin. I'm glad you finished with a pun there. It's always good to finish with a pun. Now, we do have some questions that have come through. I will say that some of them are fairly technical, and they've arisen in part because of some of the things that Luke said in his introductory comments. So the first questions, there's a number of questions around compensation and the ability for workers to get compensation, both if they contract COVID in the course of their employment, but also for the psychological impact that COVID might have had because they're working in spaces. Can you just clarify for us, what are the rights of workers to get compensation if they get COVID related to employment?
Yeah, sure. Sure, Will. And thank you for the question. Look, I do need to say that obviously every case and every claim is slightly different, but COVID-19 is a notifiable and identified workplace injury because of the illness. So if you do contract COVID through your work, you are absolutely eligible to lodge a work cover claim. And we, I think, as Luke mentioned, we've accepted just over 700 claims for people who have contracted COVID through their work. We turn around eligibility, so we determine that claim within 24 hours. So when a claim is lodged, we have a fast track system to put those supports in place. In addition to that, we also have more than 500 people who have accepted claims for COVID-related impacts or injuries. So that might be related to stress, anxiety, or other issues related to COVID. And we have also accepted those claims. So they're kind of general. That's a general answer, but I do just want to assure you that COVID is a recognised workplace injury. And if you do contract COVID through your work, you are eligible to lodge a work cover claim.
Excellent. All right, there's a lot of questions that have come through in relation to what Luke talked about with the new powers for HSRs to take photos, do videos, audio recordings. And a lot of those questions are about, so does an HSR have to get permission from their employer to take pictures, to do those things on site because it's their work site? So that's the first part of that question. And then the second part of that question, which is even slightly potentially more technical, is if the device that you are using at work, if you've got a work issued phone, for example, can you use that to take those pictures? And again, do you need to get permission from your employer because it's their device that you're using?
Thanks, Will. They are quite technical. I'll do my best. This might be one where we have to come back to you and provide more detailed response. The changes to the legislation mean that as an HSR or an REO, you will have the right and the ability under the legislation to take photographs and other evidentiary material. I don't understand it to be the case that you would need permission from your employer to do that, but I do just want to say I don't understand that to be the case, and I will clarify that. I'll talk to our legal team who helped draft the legislation. If it's a work issued device, that's an interesting question. I haven't been asked that one before. Again, I think I will have to take some advice on that. Certainly, if it's your own device, then that's your personal property. If it is a work issued device, does the property reside and have ownership with the employer? It's a very good question. I'm sorry, I can't give you that definitive answer right now, Will, but I will make sure that we come back via you and share that information when I get answers to those two questions.
Excellent. I might even suggest...
It's 30 years ago that I was an HSR. I think that's showing, isn't it? It's showing that I'm a bit out of date. We didn't have mobile phones, but actually the mobile phones that we had when I was an HSR quite literally looked like something out of Get Smart. There was a briefcase that was so big just to carry the battery.
The big brick ones. That's okay.
It was a big brick.
It suggests to me that this might be something, given the number of HSRs that are asking it, that we might get Renata at the hall with the Ask Renata to do some... We can tic-tac about that and answer those questions that way.
Absolutely.
We've got a lot of questions now because of the wonderful world of COVID, and for those workers who are working from home. There are a lot of questions about how WorkSafe is monitoring the situation for people working from home to ensure that everyone is working from home safely. Can you talk us briefly about how WorkSafe is managing that?
Yeah, so working from home, if you're working from home, then your home is a workplace. It's as simple as that. And all of the normal rules and laws and controls apply. It is important to also understand that under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, there is a dual responsibility. So people working from home also have to, they have a shared responsibility for ensuring that they're working in a safe environment. So whacking the laptop on the dining table is probably not considered a safe working environment. So making sure that you've got the correct setup, the correct ergonomics. We do get a lot of calls to our advisory service on this question, but it is absolutely the case that if you suffer an injury at home whilst in the course of your employment, that is a matter that WorkSafe would investigate, and by all, in general terms, once we'd established that it was a work-related injury, that would be an acceptable claim. And look, this is something that many workplaces, and I know many HSRs have grappled with during COVID. It's not, we don't send inspectors into people's homes. I don't think you'd want us to do that. But we do work with employers. We provide guidance. There's actually a lot of guidance on our website around specifically targeted to safe remote working or working from home, and how you do go about setting up a home office or a safe work environment for those who can work from home. We found it with our own workforce. WorkSafe has 1,500 employees. I'd say, if I take out our inspectorate and our advisory service, more than 1,000 of those employees have been working remotely since March last year. So we've gone through this process ourselves. Any employee that requests one, we provided an in-home ergonomic assessment. And if there were materials or there were recommended devices or setup requirements, then as the employer, we put those in place. Now, I appreciate that you would expect us to do that because we are, after all, the health and safety regulator. I would suggest that if you've got any concerns, or if any of your colleagues in your designated work groups have got concerns about working from home arrangements, call our advisory line. Because, as I said, we do have a lot of guidance, and if it's necessary for us to make contact with your employer to check that they are monitoring and ensuring that your work from home arrangements are safe, we will absolutely do that.
Excellent. All right. So there's also a few questions coming through. Given WorkSafe, claims going to WorkSafe and people report everything to WorkSafe, there are a few people who are curious about what the major trends are in relation to the kind of world of workplace safety at the moment, and particularly the world of injuries. Given the number of workers who've died on the job, given the number of people who've been injured, what does WorkSafe say about the major trends around that?
Yeah, thanks, Will. That's a great question. Unfortunately and tragically, as Luke pointed out, 46 people have died at work this year. Last financial year, 50 people died at work. I should point out that last year we changed our definition of a workplace death. We now include transport fatalities where it's in the course of employment. We include industrial diseases. We include suicides where it is work has been a contributing factor. And we also include criminal acts that cause the death or serious injury of a person at work. So last financial year, 50 people, as I said, tragically died at work. This year, this calendar year, we've seen 46 deaths. What we are seeing is a very worrying trend in increasing numbers of people dying while working alone. Now, as HSRs, you'd be well aware that one of the best controls, one of the best risk mitigants that we have is that second pair of eyes, that second pair of ears, that person who says, have you just checked? Can we just double check that there are no overhead wires before we lift that crane beam? Can we just check, that we've got adequate separation between the forklift and the young apprentice working in the other part of the warehouse? So many of the fatalities that we have seen, workplace fatalities that we've seen over the last 12 months, have involved often people working alone. That's a really difficult prevention challenge, and a real challenge for not just ourselves, but for you as well. So encouraging as best we can people to, wherever possible, always have that second set of eyes, that second set of ears. We're also seeing an increase in older workers again, often older workers working alone, particularly in trades, whether they're electricians or plumbers or painters, falling from heights, suffering from electric shock. And in the agriculture sector, 14% of fatalities occurring in the agriculture sector, despite the fact that farms make up 2% of Victoria's workforce. Very often still related to interaction with machinery. Quad bikes, ATV rollovers, tractor rollovers, still a shocking level of injury and unfortunately fatality for what is a relatively small part of our workforce. We're also still seeing a large number of musculoskeletal injuries, particularly from the manufacturing, postal and warehouse sector and the transport sector. But by and large, and by a significant majority, what we are seeing is an enormous growth in mental injuries, an enormous growth in psychological workplace injuries. 22% of all work cover claims in our system at the moment are from a primary mental injury. 45% of all injured workers that we are supporting at the moment have either a primary or a secondary mental injury. A secondary mental injury is how we describe a situation where a worker has a physical injury, and whilst they are recovering from the physical injury, they develop a secondary mental injury. And that could be in the form of chronic pain, it could be depression, anxiety, it could be substance dependency, all of those sort of attendant issues that are a consequence of the physical injury that lead to a mental injury. And as the Minister actually pointed out, 13% of all new claims in the last year alone were for a primary mental injury. So the work that the government is doing with the psychological safety regulations, the work that we're doing in building a psychosocial team within our inspectorate, a specialist team of inspectors made up predominantly of psychologists and people who obviously are professionally trained and qualified in psychosocial issues and hazards, both advising our inspectors but also within our inspectorate team, so we can make sure that when we visit a workplace, we're paying as much attention to potential psychological hazards as we are to a physical hazard. Because at the end of the day, the harm that can come from a psychological injury is just as severe, just as traumatic, and just as devastating as that can come from a physical injury. But without question, it's that growth in mental injury that we're grappling with at the moment. And the fact is, our scheme, some of you who are as old as I am will know that the work cover scheme was designed in the early 1980s, and it was designed predominantly to deal with physical injuries. And it's done a pretty good job of treating physical injuries. It wasn't designed to deal with the sort of psychological risks and the mental injuries that follow that we're dealing with today. So we've simply got to get better at identifying those risks, preventing those risks, and where an injury does occur, putting a really tailored suite of services and support together for the injured worker to maximise their ability to return to safe work and, most importantly, to recover their health.
All right. Well, there you have it. That's the major trends. So I want to thank Colin on behalf of all of us for attending the conference here today, and also to Colin and WorkSafe for, as always, supporting this conference in coming together during OH&S month. So thank you so much, Colin, for your time.
Thank you, Will. It's a pleasure, and thanks for having me.
All right. So up next, we're going to be joined by some very special speakers. So I've got Adrian Lidsey, Chris Ball and Jeff Phipps. Now, Adrian, Chris and Jeff are elected HSRs at Crown Casino. Now, we all know and have known for some time that cigarette smoke, even passive smoke, can have a massive impact on a person's short-term and on their long-term health. Victoria banned smoking in enclosed public spaces on 1st of July 2007, everywhere except Crown Casino, which managed to negotiate themselves a special exemption from that. Adrian, Chris and Jeff, along with the other HSRs from the affected DWGs, worked together to ensure that every worker at Crown Casino would be safe from cigarette smoke. So again, they're going to talk to us today, and then they've agreed that they'll answer some questions so that you might have there as HSRs. So once again, if you have a question that you want to ask, you should type it into the Q&A box and we'll present it to them at the end of the session. And I do believe that they were our HSRs of the year. Over to you guys.
Oh, thank you for introducing us and letting us be here today. My name's Adrian. I've been a dealer at Crown for over 20 years and predominantly worked in the premium and international rooms for that duration. About 60 years ago, the vacancy came up in health and safety in my DWG, and the members of my DWG knew that I was a bit outspoken about issues in the workplace and encouraged me to apply for one of the health and safety positions. And also I knew there was a lot of health and safety issues in my workplace, so yeah.
Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, I'm Chris. G'day, everyone. And I've worked at Crown since October 2012, so a little bit less than Adrian here, and in table games as well. And prior to working at Crown, I was in a pulp and paper factory, and I was lucky enough to become a HSR at the same time as Adrian in December 2015, and we happened to be in the same designated work group, which was great. And like Adrian, I put my hand up because I could see that there was some improvements that needed to be made. Lots of issues.
Thanks, Chris. My name's Jeff, and I've been a HSR at Crown in the hotels area since 2007. I first put my hand up to be a HSR because I believe that representation of the DWG workers is important, that their voices be heard, they get treated fairly and treated with respect. Thank you.
Yeah, so the background to this is that although smoking, as Will rightly pointed out, had been banned throughout Victoria in 2007, smoking continued at Crown in our premium and international rooms, and that every day workers were being exposed to second-hand and third-hand smoke through an exemption, Section 3E in the Victorian Tobacco Act, which gave the company that right under the high roller section of it. What made things more complicated was the Casino and Gambling Legislation Amendment Act outlined compensation Crown would be able to seek if the Victorian government ever tried to remove that exemption from legislation. It impacted workers on a daily basis. We would be surrounded by 10, 20 different people, patrons around the table, all smoking, either standing and sitting at the table, and it'd be less than a metre and a half away from you, which meant that the measures, if any, which were put in place, did very little to look after workers. You could say that most of us had our heads in the clouds. Unfortunately, those clouds were toxic, carcinogenic clouds. Most of us, at the end of the day, would come home stinking of smoke. It was quite common to have itchy eyes, a bit of a sore throat, and one could really imagine the detrimental effects that this kind of effect would have on workers in the future, such as cancers and heart disease. Unfortunately, when workers did raise issues in our workplace, the bosses and that would say, well, suck it up. It was worse than when I was a dealer, and things like that, or move teams, like move rotations, which would have a detrimental effect on that worker's financial status, losing shifts, but also the promotional opportunities moving forward, which is unacceptable.
Yeah, so Crown did have some controls in place for a long time. They had air curtains, which would sit in front of us and in front of the patrons, that would blow the smoke up. And then there'd be extraction fans in the ceiling, and there was some air monitoring as well. But us HSRs not just Adrian and I or Jeff, but all of us felt that more could be done. Some of the action we'd taken in the past had some success, but we needed further improvement. In some of the areas, we were able to get the company to agree to limit the time spent in smoking areas to less than 50% of a shift. But in other areas, employees could be exposed to passive smoke for 8 hours or more per shift. We believe the Crown was breaching Section 22 of the OHS Act by not monitoring the health of employees and not keeping appropriate records or engaging professionals to provide advice about this hazard. So we issued PINs in 2017. And we told the company that we were willing to escalate the matter to VCAT if necessary. As a result, the company agreed to set up on-site health monitoring with annual checkups for employees working in declared smoking areas. A lung function test formed part of this. It was progress, and one way we could hold the company to account over the smoking issue and a step forward in providing that safe workplace, but it wasn't an endpoint. They were all still really band-aid measures. We wanted to move up the hierarchy of controls to eliminate the hazard, and that meant getting rid of indoor smoking completely. Members were frustrated. It had been well known and is well known, has been well known for a generation, that secondhand smoke can lead to lung cancer, amongst other illnesses, and it was no secret that workers in the course of their employment were being exposed to this hazard. WorkSafe had attended the site in the past to investigate the issue and formed the view that exposure to secondhand smoke was adequately controlled. After performing air monitoring tests, they concluded that exposure was in fact below the exposure standard, and given the legislative exemption, there was no regulatory action required. This outcome resulted in members of our DWGs feeling a little bit powerless, and that speaking up wouldn't achieve anything. The Cancer Council of Victoria had a different position. They believe that there is no safe level of exposure to secondhand smoke. HSRs considered issuing a direction to cease work under Section 74 of the OHS Act, but we didn't think the entire workforce was ready. Crown had long suggested that patrons will play elsewhere. They're an international environment, and if we go non-smoking, it would cost 500 jobs, and that we would be responsible. A lot of people were scared for their job security and, like the issues that Adrian mentioned before, some flexibility and some promotion issues as well.
So in the last couple of years, we noticed that casinos in other states and other countries had started changing their practices. For example, in Macau, they had started to phase out smoking at the casinos due to health risks. Then major Queensland and Sydney casinos had also either eliminated or moved to eliminate smoking by the end of 2022. So attitudes were starting to change about indoor smoking at casinos and whether it would continue into the future.
So we re-examined the issue during COVID last year when we were all stood down. Crown was shut down for many months. There was a significant concern that upon reopening in November, the Crown could be the centre of a third wave of COVID. With so many employees and patrons in the same complex at the same time, it was clear that Crown was, and still is, a high-risk site. Union HSRs, we were meeting weekly to discuss health and safety issues, and smoking kept coming up as a key issue that we wanted to fix and the members of our DWG wanted to address. In order to smoke in the high roller rooms, patrons would need to have their masks off, obviously. It was incomprehensible to us that Crown was still intent on allowing patrons to sit or stand, within 1.2 metres of us, because we actually measured it, or each other, unmasked, and smoke, and blow that smoke and any other airborne particles around indoors during a global pandemic. Crown's position meant that employees were not only being exposed to secondhand smoke, but were also being exposed to a significant and immediate risk of contracting COVID. In this situation, HSRs felt that workers and WorkSafe would be more likely to support a direction to cease work. Additionally, one of Crown's arguments that the demand came from international high rollers was negated because there was no international travel. Finally, there was the case that should Crown management fail to act, they may actually fall afoul of the workplace manslaughter laws, which were now in place in Victoria. If a worker died as a result of workplace exposure, and that could be either to COVID or exposure to secondhand smoke. What was also clear was that employees who worked in the smoking areas were genuinely concerned for their health and safety and were starting to become more vocal.
Thanks. So this is where things get a little bit exciting. So the campaign started to kick off. So we met with management to consult about the return to work, and the HSRs put forward our position that smoking was unacceptable. There was to be no acceptable level of indoor smoking. The response from management was disappointing, and it was, no, we have a legislative exemption. What became obvious that to truly win a permanent end to indoor smoking is that we also needed to get the Victorian government on board, that they would need to remove the exemption from legislation. Therefore, the HSRs here and other HSRs, along with our union, the United Workers Union, started to write up a letter for the Premier Daniel Andrews, the Health Minister Martin Foley, Gaming Minister Melissa Horne, and the Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton, outlining our position that it needs to be removed. These letters were sent via our union, and we encouraged all members of the HSR group and members to individually send these letters to these politicians.
We let management know our position very, very clearly. One, HSRs reserve the right to issue a cease work direction if they brought back smoking. And two, that industrial manslaughter laws had come into effect in Victoria, and under these new laws, individual managers face the possibility of being prosecuted and even jailed if someone died as a result of the workplace exposure. This was stated very clearly and directly by us to Crown representatives.
Yeah, so then in October and into November, we started planning what our next steps would be, what we were willing to take in action to stop the reintroduction of smoking at Crown. HSRs for the DWGs which were affected believed that and agreed that there was no safe level of exposure to tobacco smoke, and therefore a cease work would be issued upon its reintroduction. We plan to start talking and educating our workers and our workforce around what a cease work looks like, how it works, and the need to follow the directions of their elected health and safety reps. This was a really, really important step, as this had never been done in our workplace to this point. And so the education needed to be done, that they should be joining us, and also to empower workers to take the action, that it's lawful and it's the right thing to do. Collectively stand up and speak up about health and safety. We planned for the cease work to come into effect on a day shift, and the HSRs would walk around to every table in a COVID-safe manner, and a cease work would be issued to each gaming table, getting the worker to put the float lid on, stand up and walk with us together to the next table and the next worker. We'll all then march together as a group through the casino and go outside so we could socially distance, and then we would have collective meetings outside where HSRs would talk about the next steps. What was really, really important though is that we seek the assistance of our union, the United Workers Union. We launched a petition, it was an online petition, calling on Crown to permanently ban indoor smoking. Different HSRs in our group would post the surveys in their departmental social media pages, tagging people they knew and getting them to sign on. We also started to roll this petition out in our return to work meetings, which was also really important to have that conversation with workers one-on-one. This was done in a way that everyone could see the number, and I believe you might see a picture up, that people would see the numbers ticking up as it went along. This was important to show to Crown that there was wide-based support for a permanent end to smoking, and that workers had had enough. And as you can see, over 600 workers signed the petition in relatively short time, So Crown prudently decided to review what their position was and agreed that ongoing consultation meetings would happen and respect the status quo of no return of smoking whilst the consultation process was ongoing. Jeff?
So we then reached out to the Cancer Council of Australia and the Heart Foundation. We sent them an email asking for their endorsement. Both organisations agreed to have public letters published about the issue, calling on Crown to get rid of smoking. Having the backing of these organisations helped to add weight to our argument. It pushed the campaign along.
Yep. And we went and met with the Gaming Minister to discuss the legislated exemption. We wanted to make sure that no casino in the future would have the option to allow indoor smoking, and that ultimately requires legislative change.
So then in March 2021, Crown finally agreed to permanently ban indoor smoking by the end of 2022, which was in line with announcements from other major casinos. Right now, some indoor smoking is still allowed at Crown, but the majority of the workplace is smoke-free. It is a fantastic result. The majority of the workforce is no longer exposed to cigarette smoke indoors, and if the 2022 commitment is honoured, we will finally have a smoke-free workplace. This means that we've actually moved right up the hierarchy of controls to eliminate the hazard completely, which is the best outcome for the thousands of workers at Crown. It was a huge win. Tobacco smoke can have devastating health consequences, and no one should be exposed to indoor tobacco smoke at work. It also means that when Crown does reopen these gaming tables, customers will be wearing masks consistent with the Chief Health Officer's guidelines. We can't know how many lives will be saved.
Unfortunately, this campaign isn't quite over yet. The fight's not yet done, and unfortunately smoking remains in some areas of the casino, but no worker is stationary in those areas for any significant amount of time for their shifts. Also, while there's a smoking exemption in law, the risk is always that it could return. We have met with the Gaming Minister and the Office of the Chief Health the Office of the Health Minister to stress our concerns over these issues and the need to build support for its removal. We remain hopeful that the resolution will be soon had and that we can move away from indoor exposure of tobacco smoke at Crown.
So some of the lessons that we've learned is this was only won by HSRs, delegates and workers standing together in union. It was down to a strong, united team of 7 or 8 HSRs with the support of the union and our DWGs. It all came down to power of the collective. Get your DWG involved, get your union involved. A fight of this scale, it couldn't have been won by a single person or a single HSR. Together, workers win.
Yeah, a lot of the success we had was down to finding the actual right moment and acting decisively when that moment came. We knew we had to do everything possible to lower the risk of COVID, and that simply couldn't happen if smoking indoors continued. We had the opportunity to eliminate that deadly hazard while simultaneously reducing the risk of another deadly hazard. And given the legislative protections afforded to Crown for too long on the indoor smoking issue, it was always going to take the right set of circumstances to overcome it. When the time came, we acted and we had a plan. We had the buy-in from our DWG members and we acted decisively using the powers we have under the OHS Act.
Yeah, definitely the lesson we learned is that we're stronger together and that as a collective of workers, we can overcome the greatest of adversities. We can achieve anything if we are willing to come together, speak up and take action. Solidarity forever, comrades.
Excellent work. Nice to finish with a little solidarity forever. I'll just say to you that there's in terms of the questions that are coming through, there aren't that many questions. There's a lot of thumbs up, great work. So that's what I'm getting a lot of at the moment. But so just a reminder, this is the moment if you have questions of our 3 HSRs here, then just pop them in the chat there and we'll put as many of them as we can to them. as always, there is always a question, the first one, which is like advice that you might want to give other HSRs when trying to tackle hazards in a workplace, particularly against management resistance. So when management is pushing back, what is it that what's the advice you would give to other HSRs who are dealing with management? You've got a problem, you know what it is, you want to deal with, how do you push back against management?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first, I guess. It's always about the collective. Seek assistance. You're not meant to know everything, but together you can tackle. We've shown with smoking that anything can be achieved, so it's always important to get your DWG on board, get all the workers on board, get your union involved, get other health and safety reps on board, and it doesn't matter what the boss has to say. You guys can achieve anything. Chris?
100%. Understand how your DWG feel about it. Speak to them. How is this affecting them, these hazards? Use your powers under the Act and your entitlements under the Act to take that time off in your work hours to get that information that you require. Spend a couple of hours analysing, looking at some reports on the hazard, conversing with your union. If you've got other HSRs, speak to them about it. And ultimately, if it just feels wrong, if you just know it's wrong, if you just know it's dangerous, then push it, persist, and just continue as far as you can. You've got a lot of power, and the further you go, the more power you have in some ways.
And what helped also was that we took our DWG members into account. We took the time to talk to them, and they supported us very strongly, as was shown with the petition. The 600 signatures went up in a very quick time. When you've got that sort of backing from your own members, it makes a big difference.
Can I unpack that a little bit more then? So, because there's a few HSRs who are saying they feel a bit isolated and they feel like they don't have the support of their DWG, for example, when they're raising things. What are the kinds of things that you did to get that support amongst the workers to then be able to take that further, to get your petition up and that kind of thing? What are the things that you did?
I'll go first. A lot of it, I think, comes down to educating the DWG. Sometimes a lot of the things we've pushed over the years, we've led the campaign and we've educated the workforce. Might be social media. Well, we have a very large workplace. It's unique. We have a couple of thousand dealers as an example. But even if you've got a workplace with a dozen people or 20 people, take the time to educate them about their rights, why you feel that something's wrong, and outline the Act. Outline Section 21, Section 22. Outline Section 58, your powers. The consultation provision, Section 35. Go through all of those things and educate them so that they understand the company's obligations. And they can come along the journey with you. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I'd also add that I look at the Ask Renata this week, where it stated that you have the right to speak to your workforce and see what injuries are happening in your workplace. If there's injuries happening, people are talking about it. Don't be frightened to speak to every single member of your workplace. You have that right, and you represent them. So it's about speaking to each one of them, bring them along for the ride, and then acting in a group together.
Also what was useful was we were also in touch with the union, and our union was able to give us extra resources and help to take the issue up further with the management and to come from a position of strength. So with everything combined, it just made the whole job much easier, I think.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
As well? I think we've all had moments, I know I have, and these guys have as well, where managers have pulled us aside, tried to, pull us into an office, have a quick chat. Oh, are you sure? You sure that your DWG support this? Are you sure this is a big issue? You're protected under the Act. You can't be discriminated against in any way. You're not going to lose your job. by becoming a HSR or as a delegate or something, you've got a bit of a target on your back. We all know that. First thing is, advice from me would be, do your job well. Dot the I's, cross the T's in your normal work. Don't leave yourself exposed in any way. And understand the Act as much as you can about your powers, so that when you approach an issue, you're very confident from where you're coming from. And over time, might be the first pin you issue or something, those little moments of managerial sort of influence over you, or what they're trying to do, that will subside. They'll soon find out that won't work. That won't work with you.
And so there's some questions around. There was particularly a comment during when Colin was here earlier, which is around that when WorkSafe comes to a site, they should be talking to the HSRs, right? Now, the experience that we would say is the feedback we always get from HSRs is that doesn't always happen. So when you engaged, like you've engaged in the political process around it, and you've engaged in all of those processes, you've engaged with WorkSafe around it. What was your experience? Like, at what point did you go, now I feel like we should be talking to WorkSafe about this, as well as building the group of workers and all of that, so building the support among the DWG. At what point did you go, let's chat to WorkSafe about this?
You can go, Chris.
Look, we were lucky. Adrian and I are in the same designated work group, and we've been reps together for nearly 6 years. So whenever WorkSafe was involved, not all the time, but the vast majority of the time, if pins were issued and they were disputed and WorkSafe were attending, we would be both in the room together, because we'd issue pins together. A lot of the time, especially obviously with this one, where WorkSafe couldn't support us with smoking because of the exemption, on other issues, just generally speaking, WorkSafe would be frank when we would be talking to them, and they'd say, look, I can't issue an improvement notice over this. There's just not enough. There's just not enough risk, I don't think, on this issue. So I can't support the pin. But where are you coming from with this? What would you like to achieve? And then, so when we would have them in the room, either just one-on-one or with a couple of HSRs with WorkSafe, they would hear our side very clearly. Then when they speak to management, obviously they have their side. On a few occasions, we all ended up in the room together in effectively a negotiation. Sometimes we negotiated what would be a new operational update that would go out that did, in some way, achieve what we wanted. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
So it sounds like when WorkSafe came,
yeah,
it was helpful to have them there engaging, and that they came and talked to you because you're there.
Oh, definitely. Rather than just management, just hoping it goes away.
There's been a question around, again, this was during Colin's piece, but I'm interested to get your thoughts on it, that HSRs often have to educate employers about their role because you're aware of your rights, but, management isn't always aware of their rights. Have you had to do some of that along the way in terms of when you've met with management, you've basically had to go, actually, what's been the experience there?
That's been always an ongoing issue. It's that power imbalance where they believe you're just a worker and they're the boss, so you need to listen to them, which that's all they've got. They go, I'm the boss, how dare you speak up against me? It's wrong. You're speaking on behalf of the workers, and nothing gets done. If all the workers were to walk out today, nothing would ever get done, and you deserve to go home the same way you got to work. So it's being able to stand up and say, no, this is what's right, and then being willing to call WorkSafe or get your union on board or whatever that is, but be prepared to stand up for what your rights are. That's the most important thing.
Absolutely. The more you push it, the more you use your power, this is what we found in the beginning anyway, the more they try to suppress it, I think. And sometimes people that have moved up the food chain and within the organisation just don't understand that a worker could shut the place down if they wanted to. That's a power you have. They don't like that power, but it's a power you have.
But Chris, even more than that, I reckon Jeff has the best thing which happens in his workplace, where I'll let you talk about it, but your boss actually, yeah.
Yeah, I've had my boss is actually on the committee. He's the representative on the Health and Safety Committee, and he's fairly conscious of health and safety matters, but we've had a few bits and pieces, but now we have a fairly good understanding. So if I bring up an issue, they actually listen to me and I can get consultation. If I need time off to talk to the DWG, I even had an instance where, with the help of the union, we whipped up a survey, and I was given time to have 10-minute interviews with members of my DWG. Unfortunately, then COVID lockdown came in, but yes, the relationship that I've managed to develop there means that they're more respectful of me and the workers there, and I get consulted much better now.
There's some questions about the advice that you got along the way. So, did you get legal advice? Did you rely? Did that worry you along the way that you had to get legal advice, or were you really focused on what the raising the issues for the DWG and the kind of whether or not you had a good case was kind of less important to you than whether you were speaking for your DWG, or was it both, or what was it for you?
This had been discussed for years. Some of our predecessors, HSRs, very strong HSRs, even before us, were pushing on the smoking issue. It really didn't matter. The law says one thing. It doesn't matter what the law says, really. If something's wrong, then use whatever leverage you have to change it. That's what it came down to, really, with this.
100%. It's good knowing the laws. It's fantastic, but it doesn't really mean that much. In the end, if you really want to seek change, you can achieve anything. You speak on behalf of your DWG, and if it's right, if it keeps you safe, then pursue it, no matter what the obstacles are.
For me, on this issue, on the smoking issue, I don't even work in those smoking areas. It was more a matter of justice. This was just simply wrong. And when I spoke to members of my DWG, they were outraged that these guys were being subjected to that sort of stuff. So I think sometimes it's just getting people activated around what they can clearly see as wrong and not worry what the legal what's-the-names are. It's about changing that. And if we've got the powers and we use them and we campaign, we can.
So you've had this great win, right? So this win has happened, and you've built up this group of you've got over 600 signatories to your petition, and clearly everyone's been activated around this issue. So do you have thoughts about what you are going to, as HSRs, that's a lot of energy that you've built up around health and safety and a kind of consciousness of that. Now we're going to start going back. We're going back into work now. So have you had thoughts about what you might do to kind of maintain that energy and keep people engaged beyond this one issue and this one win?
Yeah, so we kind of got the win over smoking earlier this year, and we continue to have issues around going back into workplace, working with a lot of people surrounded on tables which are, as Chris mentioned, we measured it out to be 1.2 metres. People were concerned about mask wearing and things like that. And so we had another win straight off that bat of no mask, no play. That you couldn't come up to a table without continuing to wear a mask. People were engaged in that. But it's moving further than that. And it's, even though we only had I would say, the 7 to 10 HSRs on board in this campaign, we've managed to grow that. And it's about growing that health and safety group.
Yep.
Getting every DWG health and safety reps which are going to represent their DWG and not the boss. And then more engagement with workers so that every worker feels like their voice is being heard and that everyone comes home safe at night.
musculoskeletal disorder and RSI problems that are huge amongst the dealers. Wrist injuries, shoulder injuries. We still have a lot of work to do on that. Obviously, we haven't been at work much in the last 18 months, but when we return, which will be in the next week or two, that will be a huge focus.
And for me, there's always been a history of abusive customers at times at Crown. More strength on those issues. The Crown actually treats it a lot more seriously than they have in the past. And better security presence for me in my area. We often have to wait for a response because most of the security's concentrated around the gaming areas. So we've been, I've already started a conversation about that. So yeah, there's plenty to campaign for.
So we're never done, is what we're saying. We're never, ever done. All right, so we've got just a couple of minutes left. So I'm just going to kind of ask you all whether there's any final words that you want to say to the HSRs that are out there today around, and I'm thinking particularly about the lessons that you learnt in this process, whether there was anything that kind of really stuck out to you as something that you went, oh, yeah, or whatever. Like, were there any light bulb moments or the lessons that you learnt along the way that might be helpful for our HSRs who are with us in the conference today?
Not a light bulb moment as such. I think for me it's just persistence. It really just comes down to persistence. Now, very, very rarely in my experience and in our experience, the first time we approach an issue or we discuss it with management and we propose a solution, is the answer yes? Very rarely. You have to push them to that sometimes. So be prepared for conflict at times. Ideally, there's an issue, you raise it and it's resolved, but it doesn't always happen that way. So just keep persisting. That's all I'd say.
Yeah, and sometimes it just takes breaking things down a bit. I think the fact that we work collectively, where in the past, the company often tried to isolate, oh, you work in that area, you work in that area. They've made it difficult for us to get together, but we've broken through that, and then you can look for support from your union, from other people. And when you take all that into account, you don't feel so isolated and you don't feel like you're carrying all the burden, and that helps you to achieve whatever you want to achieve.
Yeah, there's not much more I can add to Chris and Jeff. It's seek assistance from everyone. Be persistent. Be persistent. If it's right and you're representing your DWG, continue. Just push, push, push. Get your union involved. But they're the three main things. Is it right? Work as a collective. Anything's possible. You guys can achieve anything.
All right, I reckon, like I say, there's not so many questions coming through. There's a lot of hats off, amazing win, all that kind of stuff. So I might wrap this session up. On behalf of all of the HSRs out there, I want to thank the three of you for your efforts as HSRs, but also, and for that amazing win on behalf of all of those other workers, and also for the time that you've put in today and come along and share that with us. So for those of you out there, we're going to have a half-hour break. Now, I have had some comments come through here, which is that some of you are struggling a little bit with buffering, or that, the feed is being a bit paused. We're going to go to a break now. We're going to try and see what we can do about that during the break. So we will be back at 10:30 on the dot, and we'll have another session then. So we'll have our keynote speaker then, who is Lynn Fritsky, and so come back then, have a nice cuppa now, relax, put your feet up, and we'll see you back here at 10:30. Thanks, everyone.